I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation and co-chair of End Jew Hatred Canada. Our program today was renamed UNRWA, Incites Violence Against Jews, because there's plenty of evidence, which you will hear today, that the organization, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, does more than promote Jew hatred, it promotes violence and genocide against the Jewish people. We want the world to understand this. We want the world to do more than just deliver misinformation and allow UNRWA to continue to miseducate and abuse 500,000 students. The Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is a registered charitable organization doing both education and advocacy to alert people to the rising Jew hatred that is now a factor in so many sectors of life here in Canada and across Western countries. It is shrouded often in anti-Zionism. That is supposed to protect the haters who are otherwise anti-Semites. That's exactly what they are. Help CAEF to produce webinars, bulletins, and educational material to advocate with researched and factual evidence of anti-Semitism and to promote and expand the grassroots movement End Jew Hatred Canada. We are taking direct action to expose the haters and hold them accountable. Today, we're about to see a video that is quite explicit in showing the true violence being encouraged among UNRWA students. And then you'll see a presentation with pages of textbooks used in schools operated by this UN agency. None of what you hear today should be taken lightly, not just observed. We are asking that you think about what you can do. The Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is asking for your support in confronting donor countries, demand that they withhold funding, demand that UNRWA cease its terrorism incitement, that it revises its textbooks and teaching manuals, and takes corrective action in line with the UN's own code of conduct. Our speakers today, I'll introduce now, are David Bedein, a community organizer, writer, and investigative journalist. In 1987, David established the Israel Resource News Agency and became the head of the Center for Near East Policy Research. David has reported in many media outlets, including CNN Radio, Makor Rishon, Philadelphia Bulletin, and the Jerusalem Post. He's the author of Roadblock to Peace, How the UN Perpetuates the Arab-Israeli Conflict, UNRWA Policies Reconsidered. Though this was published in 2014, things have not changed much. Dr. Arnon Groiss served as Director of Research for the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance, or IMPACT, between the years 2000 and 2010. And he's authored reports on hundreds of school books from Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Tunisia, and the Palestinian Authority. Dr. Groiss holds an MA and PhD from Princeton University's Department of Near East Studies and an MPA from Harvard University, and is an expert in Arabic language. Arnon's career includes more than 30 years as an Arabic language journalist. And upon his retirement, he served as the Deputy Director of the Arabic Language Service of the Israel Broadcasting Authority. And since 2000, he has examined more than 1,000 textbooks that the Palestinian Authority has provided to UNRWA. He's authored and presented monographs on UNRWA's education program to the US Congress, the British Parliament, the German Bundestag, the Swedish Parliament, and to the Knesset. Brooke Goldstein is Canadian born, I always have to claim that, and educated, and a New York-based human rights attorney, author, and award-winning filmmaker. She's the executive director of the Lawfare Project, an NGO dedicated to raising awareness about and facilitating a response to the abuse of Western legal systems and human rights law. Brooke has a long list of activities in the human rights field, including both producing films and books, legal cases, public speaking engagements, and as a news commentator. She co-authored the book Lawfare, The War Against Free Speech, a First Amendment guide for reporting in the age of Islamic lawfare. This provides practical guidance to journalists who wish to speak truthfully about the national security threats faced by liberal democracies. and she too has done work in documenting the making of martyrs among Palestinian Arab children. Brooke founded the grassroots Jewish civil rights movement End Jew Hatred in the fall of 2020, and today it has expanded across the US into Canada, Europe, and Israel. And today she joins David and Arnon in speaking with us from Israel. This webinar is being recorded and will be available later this week on our website. You're invited to submit questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom, just the Q&A, not chat. I now invite David Bedein to introduce the film that will give you an insight to this incitement.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and may everyone be well and have a meaningful Yom Kippur. Very often, when the story of how Canada cut off funds to UNRWA back in 2009, it wasn't clear. The reason was because there was a discovery that UNRWA had been taken over, their unions had been taken over by Hamas. And Hamas seems to be something innocuous, just it's a name, whatever. And the reason why we were showing this film, we made this film this summer about how children from UNRWA are intoxicated and indoctrinated with a program each summer to teach them how to use weapons. This summer, it was all the more serious. 30,000 children, we were able to get access and make this film. And the whole story of asking countries to please, as we just heard from Andrea, to condition their funds that such things shouldn't be taught. That's a basic, because this is the summer, and just finishing the summer, as it bleeds onto the school year. I also want to give you a quick news item, which is very important. No one knows it yet. We just got the protocols of the meeting that took place at the UN Donors Conference, in which it was announced that the United States is holding back its funds that it had promised because of U.S. congressional pressure and popular pressure. And now we have just heard from the Palestinian Curriculum Center that provides school books for the PA in this school year that they won't be able to do so. They don't have enough money. So Qatar, known for its terror connections, will be financing the school books, and they'll be printed in Jordan. And the good news is, because they're going to be delivered at the Allenby Bridge between Jordan and Israel, that gives the opportunity for the donor nations ambassadors and for Israel itself to lay their hands on those books. And when you'll see examples of the books from Dr. Groiss, if they are wrong, they can be taken care of. I'll mention that in terms of Canada did pull out its funds from UNRWA and then put it back in without examining the Hamas connection. So let's take a look right now at the film we made this summer with our Palestinian crew on the scene in Gaza. We call it the UNRWA Child Soldier. Let's take a look.
Hamas and Islamic Jihad Summer Camps 2021. The way children from UNRWA schools spent their summer vacation.
مخيم طلائع التحرير سيف القدس للعام 2021. الله أكبر ولله الحمد.
واحنا جيل فلسطين احنا بنعشق الشهادة.
والله احنا بنجاهد عشان القدس وعشان وطننا ونموت شهداء.
هاي جيل التحرير هان بنحرر فلسطين والقدس وكل الدول المحتلة.
جاي اتدرب عشان احارب اليهود لما اكبر وندافع عن القدس وعن فلسطين.
نتدرب ونستعد لأي حرب جاية، لأن نحن الجيل الجديد الذي يعود لأرضه وسنحرر الأقصى بإذن الله.
As the world has witnessed every year over the past decade, UNRWA students, even those who have not yet finished elementary school, are lured to participate in summer camps for armed guerrilla warfare. These children, who should expect UNRWA to provide a normal summer vacation environment, fall prey to terror groups that lurk everywhere, or are sent to these programs by their own parents. This summer, armed operatives signed up tens of thousands of UNRWA students ages 10 to 17 for summer camps offering extensive military training. Recruitment took place in mosques and at registration tables throughout the Gaza Strip.
إن صراعنا مع عدونا هو صراع على الجيل، ومن يكسب الجيل في النهاية يكسب المعركة.
ضربونا شوية نتعامل مع التيس الشرس النتنياهو ونفتالي بنات وحط القملة على البرغوث ونفتالي بنات يا رب يموت.
دستوركم سبيلكم أستعمنيكم
At terrorist bases belonging to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the youngsters experienced intense military discipline and systematic indoctrination with one objective in mind: to fight and die for jihad and to annihilate the Jewish state.
احنا جيل التحرير وهذه الارض إلنا، واليهود مش راح يضلوا على هذه الارض. انا بقول لهم انهم يرجعوا من حيث اتوا، اطلعوا قبل من بيتكم واحنا راح نحرر هذه الارض. اذا مات شهيد راح يجي بداله 1000 شهيد. الله اكبر الله اكبر الله اكبر.
أعد جيلا يحمل هذا السيف ليضرب به العدو.
At the summer camps, UNRWA youngsters learned to view the United States and Israel as the devil, the ultimate enemy. They trampled on the flags of both nations and set them afire.
سنعمل أن تستمر جدوى الصراع حتى يوقن بأنه لا مجال له إلا الرحيل.
جايين اليوم احنا عند مخيمات سيف القدس، اقترب الوعد حتى نبني اجسامنا واجسادنا حتى نقهر بني صهيون ونرجع على اراضينا المحتله.
كان اليهود ما لهمش قيمه هنا، يعني ما لهمش ارض. نتدرب نجاهد في سبيل الله وهذا نستشهد ان شاء الله في سبيل الله.
تكبير تكبير.
حلمي انه اطلع اني يعني اصير دكتور ومقاوم، يعني علم مع جهاد في سبيل الله، وعشان نحرر فلسطين ونطهرها من اليهود من الاحتلال الصهيوني المجرم.
مفيش حاجة اسمها دولة إسرائيل أصلاً عشان يكون لهم عاصمة قبل كل شيء. إذا القدس عاصمة فلسطين الأبدية.
They learned how to use automatic weapons of all kinds. Instructors taught them how to assemble each weapon, hold it correctly, and operate it.
أول إشي تدريب، أول إشي يعلمونا طريقة اسم السلاح وفك السلاح وكيف تنظيف. ثاني إشي طريقة حمل السلاح. ثالث إشي عندك التدريب القوي، بدك من تحت الزحف تدريب. ثالث إشي إن نحمل وكيف نطخ لقدام، نتعلم كيف نطخ ونصوب الأهداف القريبة، ونتعلم على الأسلحة بأنواعها. المدربين ما شاء الله عليهم هان بيعلموا كل أنواع الأسلحة هان.
The terrorists working as camp instructors provided them with detailed descriptions of the mortars used by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and even of the tanks used by the Israel Defense Forces. The UNRWA youngsters practiced fighting in built-up areas, as well as commandeering a vehicle.
احنا ما بنقدر نحارب الا بالسلاح، زي ما هم بيحاربونا بالسلاح احنا حنحارب بالسلاح. هي هيك المعادله، ما بيفهموا الا بلغه السلاح.
One exercise featured a mock-up of an Israeli tank. The idea was to teach the children how to sneak up on a tank and kidnap Israeli soldiers.
عشان هيك احنا بنحارب وبنتعلم من الصغر عشان ايش؟ عشان لما نكبر نبقى مستعدين لمقاتلة اليهود وتطردهم من البلد، لانه هذه مش بلدهم، يرجعوا بلدهم، هذه مش بلدهم، هذه بلدنا. لما اكبر بدي استشهد واعمل عمليات مدافع عن وطني وعن ارضي، هذه فلسطين. انا والله نفسي استشهد.
حط السيف قبال السيف واحنا رجال محمد ضيف.
نعلمهم فن القتال مع هذا العدو المغتصب الذي اغتصب أرضنا، فنحن سنعد هذا الجيل ومن أجل أن نفجر جماجم هذا العدو.
من تحت الأرض نخرج إليكم ندق الرعب في قلوبكم، ومن فوق الأرض بصواريخنا نقطعكم أشلاء.
Top commanders from Hamas and Islamic Jihad were in charge of the military training and stated clearly that the goal was for the youngsters to take part in the future battle against Israel.
الكبار أرضعوا الصغار حب الوطن وحب الجهاد وحب الاستشهاد.
The children attending the summer camps were taught about their so-called inalienable right of return to cities inside Israel, such as Jaffa, Lod, Haifa, Beersheba, Ashdod, and Ashkelon. With these cities just kilometers away, they were told that a return was literally in reach.
إن شاء الله بدنا نرجع وإن شاء الله كل كتاب القسم حيكونوا معنا لأنه هذه بلدتنا الأصلية رح نحررها غصب عنه.
أن الاحتلال الصهيوني طرد أبائنا وأجدادنا من أجلنا لنضحي في دمنا ونرجع حيفا والجاهد بالجهاد.
نحن نساء الجهاد شهادة أرضنا.
Girls affiliated with Islamic Jihad happily recited the mantras of terror. They are an integral part of the movement, meant to show that terrorism is not a male-dominated system.
لابد لنا أن نقوم ببناء جيل قرآني واعي، لابد لنا كأمهات فلسطينيات أن نرسل أبناؤنا إلى هذه الأماكن لنزرع فيهم حب البلاد، حب فلسطين، حب الجهاد.
لابد أن كل امرأة منا تكون أم الشهيد، أخت الشهيد، يعني نزيد الوعي الثقافي عند أبنائنا حتى يجي يوم وهذه الأطفال يصير يعني مقاومة وتصير تدافع هي عن الأرض ونرجعها إلنا.
The women of Islamic Jihad bestowed the legacy of their cause on the next generation. Notably, the summer camps featured the photos of female suicide bombers who blew themselves up to murder Jews.
أنا بلدة الأصلية بلدة يبنى، حنعود عليها بالحجر والسكينة.
هم أصلا أعداء ويهود، هم من هم اليهود؟ هم طبعا قبائل تجمعت من كل دول العالم وأجهد كونوا لهم وطن كما يدعون لهم في فلسطين.
حط السيف في قبال السيف، حط السيف في قبال السيف، إحنا رجال محمد ضيف، إحنا رجال محمد ضيف.
As the summer camps drew to a close, each camper received a certificate of appreciation complete with his photo, attesting to the completion of formal weapons training and a readiness to fight the Jews. For the UNRWA students, these photos depicted them with automatic weapons and showed them imbued with ideological motivation.
الذين يشبهون المجاهدين في أعمالهم ويتشبهون بهم وهم مجاهدون المستقبل بإذن الله.
Clearly, the Hamas and Islamic Jihad summer camps have become training grounds for the vilification of Israel. UNRWA teachers and textbooks complement this with an ideology and curriculum that promotes armed struggle for the right of return. Last May, the most recent outbreak of anti-Israel violence in Gaza exposed a tunnel dug by Hamas under a school in UNRWA's Zaytun refugee camp. Here is the evidence. Hamas thus takes the UNRWA children captive not only during the summer, but during the school year itself. UNRWA students constitute a future terror army aimed at liquidating Israel based on the illusion of a right of return. UNRWA can no longer act as if it does not know. UNRWA is proud of its 400 schools in Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem. It allocates 58% of its budget for an education system that indoctrinates a new generation for war. In essence, it has abandoned its students. The time has come for UNRWA to teach peace and coexistence during both the school year and summer vacation. The time has come for the world to demand oversight of UNRWA schools. The time has come for donor nations to put an end to UNRWA anarchy.
أنا اسمي ضياء أبو الديب، صف سادس، عمري 12، يافا.
أنا اسمي حمزة بوهين من بلد برير.
اسمي قصاية، عمري 13 سنة، من المجدة.
أنا من بلدة حمامة، اسمي خالد.
أنا اسمي آسر البيك من بلدة تربية.
شمس يوسف ياسين من حيفا.
اسمي عاصم فرج من الشجاعية وأصلي من بئر السبع.
أنا اسمي براب سكران، عمري 15 سنة، أنا أصلي من المجدة.
عبد الله 9 يافا.
محمد عبد الله سليم 13 سنة، بئر السبع.
فايز عبد الكريم مصباح الداية 12 من حيفا.
أنا اسمي أسماء الجرا، أنا بلدة الأصلية بلدة يبنى.
اسمي فداء أبو طيور، لاجئة، أصلي من بلدة سرفند العمار.
Well, if that isn't horrifying enough, which is shocking in the utmost, and if your gut isn't wrenched by now, let me introduce Dr. Arnon Groiss, who will take you through the textbooks that are used. So summer vacation and now the everyday school classroom experience.
Thank you. I would like to start with the three fundamentals of the Palestinian school books, which are used in UNRWA schools. There are three fundamentals. The first, the legitimization of the very existence of the state of Israel and the very presence of the Jews in this country, denial of their history in holy places there. The second fundamental is demonization of both Israel, which is the source of all evil, the ultimate victimizer, and Palestinians the ultimate victim, and Jews are demonized as enemies of Islam from its very beginning. The third fundamental, which I'm going to concentrate upon, is the absence of advocacy of peaceful resolution of the conflict, and instead advocacy of war indoctrination, in fact, against Israel, against the Jews. I would like just to try to show you my present point now. So we're talking about peace, okay? Now, there is one instance in the whole Palestinian curriculum in which peace with Israel is mentioned. In the historical chapter about the Oslo Agreement between Israel and the PLO, they present parts of Yasser Arafat's letter to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, which says that the PLO recognizes the right of the state of Israel to live in peace and security, and it accepts the resolutions of 242 and 338 of the Security Council, and it is committed to the peace process in the Middle East, and it denies or renounces terror and any violent actions. This is the only mentioning of peace, and it doesn't find any echo in any other textbook used in the PLO, in the Palestinian Authority schools, or in UNRWA schools. what we have instead? Instead, we have war indoctrination, actually. And these are the examples. This is the national anthem of the Palestinian Authority, which is full of violent expressions like volcano my revenge, weapons fire, Palestine is my revenge, I shall live as a Fidai and shall continue as a Fidai, and I shall die as a Fidai. Fidai is a member of the terrorist organization, Palestinian terrorist organization. Today, it is this term is used to denote them. This is how the violent struggle for the liberation of Palestine is depicted to first-grade students without any words. And this is another anthem of the youth movement of the Fatah organization, not Hamas, Fatah. And you can see very clearly here, we have carried the ember of the revolution, namely Fatah activity, to Haifa, to Jaffa. So Haifa and Jaffa are part of the full liberation of Palestine. And this is a language exercise. It says, Harayafa an ta'uda li ahdanina. It would be appropriate for Jaffa to return to our bosom. And there is another slide, I haven't shown it to you, which says that the territory of Israel, pre-67 Israel, is the territory, Palestinian territory occupied in 1948. Now we can see this is an item sold to tourists in Bethlehem, and we can clearly see that in Free Palestine, it says Free Palestine here in English, in Free Palestine there is no room for Israel, right? Another example, we are talking about the perceived right of return of the refugees, descendants, the 48 refugees, or their descendants rather, and they are not going to live in peace with the neighbors, as the UN resolution of 1948 says, 194 resolution. They are going to Palestine after it would be liberated from Israel, and they are going to hoist the Palestinian flag on the liberated areas where they are going to return to. And this is another item which says the same expression. I will reclaim it as a sovereign homeland. Israel will not be there. And terror is part and parcel of this particular liberation struggle. This is the first out of 4 pages of a lesson about Dalal al-Mughrabi, the female commander of the terrorist squad which attacked an Israeli civilian bus on Israel's coastal highway in 1978 and killed over 30 persons, men, women, and children. Now she is exalted, you see. She has illustrated with her struggle a picture of challenging and bravery, and we have made her memory eternal in our hearts and minds. This is terror. This is a poem answering the question, the implicit question, what should be done with the surviving Jews after the liberation of Palestine? And it says very clearly, وَأُبِيدَ فُلُولَ الْغُرَبَاءِ, and to exterminate the foreigners' defeated remnants. Fulul is defeated remnants. Ubid, I will exterminate. And they sing it in class, actually. You can see it here. I swear I shall sacrifice my blood in order to water the land of the noble ones and to remove the usurper, that is the code from Israel, from my country, and to exterminate the foreigners defeated. I'm showing you the translated. This is the part. This is the part, exterminate. How do I get out of this? Well, Luckily for all of us, this particular poem was removed. It was up to 2019. In 2020, it was replaced by another poem, but I doubt that they stopped singing it in class. The conclusion, it's the legitimization of Israel, demonization of Jews in Israel, never advocate. They call for violent struggle for liberation, which is not limited to the 67 lines, and in which there plays a central part. I forgot to tell you, I have some other examples as well, that this particular struggle is made religious by the necessity, they say, to liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque from the devil's aids, and also by using the traditional terms of jihad and shahada, as we have seen in the film. Now, I would say that being a UN agency, UNRWA is committed to neutrality and peace, according to UN resolutions. But its use of such schoolbooks sharply contradicts the commitment of that commitment and makes UNRWA a full accomplice in the PA anti-Semitic indoctrination. Moreover, UNRWA betrays its sacred obligation towards the well-being of the Palestinian children and youth under its care by preparing them for war. This kind of education, in my opinion, should stop immediately, and the donor state should have a say in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arnon. And we'll now ask Brooke, who would like to give us if she would give us a few minutes of her interpretation and perhaps some suggestions on action, and then we're going to open it up for a dialogue among the panelists.
So first of all, I want to thank Andrea for putting on this very important event and for inviting me to be a part of it. It's really an honor to be together again with David and Arnon. I'm a huge fan of the work they are doing. They have been on the forefront of exposing what I believe to be one of the greatest crimes against humanity, which is the state-sponsored indoctrination and recruitment of innocent Muslim children towards violence. And the work that they are doing is extraordinarily important. And I would encourage everyone to share the link to this video as well as other videos that they have done in the past. It is so, I mean, every time I see these videos, I'm horrified. The horror is never reduced, because this is the biggest tragedy that is happening right now in the Middle East. And this is the reason why we have continued conflict, because innocent Muslim children are being taught that the greatest thing that they can aspire to is shahada, is martyrdom, is to kill themselves as suicide homicide bombers, as child soldiers. And all those who claim to care about the Palestinian Muslims, who claim to be the protectorates of that society, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers, all the politicians who are constantly weighing in on the so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict, consistently either ignore or outright deny this form of child abuse, where the Muslim children is first and foremost the victim. They are being victimized directly, physically abused, as you saw in this video. They are being recruited for suicide homicide attacks directly out of UNRWA schools. David and Arnon, I think it was a couple of years back, did a paper, an op-ed, I can't remember, talking about Al-Qutla al-Islamiyah, which is Hamas's youth wing that is invited directly into UNRWA schools to recruit children for suicide homicide attacks. Now, the problem is threefold. Number one, the West has politicized this. They have said, well, there is an excuse, and the excuse is political. It is okay to kill Muslim children as long as Jews are involved, or it has something to do with Israel. So whereas groups like Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers will have no problem condemning the use of innocent African children by various militant groups there, they cannot bring themselves themselves to condemn the murder of Muslim children, as long as that murder is done to serve a cause of Jew hatred. And this is the biggest crime. The second issue is the stifling and shaming of public dialogue about this issue. Anyone who talks about what Arnon said, for example, is the theological root causes of this conflict, which is Islamist indoctrination, the use of the Muslim religion to justify the murder of children in this form. Anyone who talks about this is slandered as an Islamophobe. And this, I don't understand, because if raising awareness about the abuse of Muslim children and advocating that these children are innocent, these children do not deserve to be treated this way, that there is no excuse whatsoever, religious, political, moral, or otherwise, to kill and harm a Muslim child. If this is anti-Islamic, what then is pro-Islam? So the hypocrisy to silence those who are on the front lines, especially within the Jewish Israeli community, who are really the only people advocating for a two-state solution, who are the only people advocating for the protection of these children under international law, that Muslim children should have equal protection under the law, they are slandered. And, the third problem, again, as was exposed by you, Andrea, and by David, is the continued funding by Western states of this form of mass infanticide. So with that, I think we should open it up. I had a question of David. If you could clarify for our audience exactly what the UNRWA connection was to the summer schools. Now, I know UNRWA runs schools where they teach from Khatmas textbooks. As we mentioned, they invite al-Qutla al-Islamiyya, and there is indoctrination in the schools themselves during the year. But then there's also these summer camps. So what is the connection exactly between the UNRWA and the summer camps? You're saying that UNRWA students were attending the camps. Can you clarify that?
Yeah. Thank you. There are two connections. The first connection is that the madrichim, the counselors, are also teaching in the UNRWA schools. That's number one. Number two, the recruitment, it's an all year recruitment of the children to go to the summer camp as a gift at the end of the year for excellence in studies. So the children have this as I'm sure when we grew up, going to a summer camp, going to a special elite summer camp was something very special. All year long, are you going to go to the summer camp and learn how to use a Kalashnikov, a hula? That is the connection. Two connections, the teachers and the recruitment. And of course, you see the most important thing, too many people say, well, they're only school books. They really don't influence. But when you see the results, and by the way, I don't see hatred in the children. I see more or less teaching the concept of violence. You see the children becoming robots. And in the 12 years in which I've been making these films, 14 years making these films, that it repeats itself all the time. Not hatred, but indoctrination of violence. And that all year long, these are the same children, by the way, who rush the fences in Gaza. And why do they rush the fences? Not because they're just fences. They believe, the children are led to believe that they're going back to Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Beersheba. They have maps put out by the PA, and they were smart enough to order maps from those municipalities so they can see where they think they're going to live. And they developed a website called PalestineRemembered.com. I recommend that everyone look at it to understand the situation. They really think they're going back to their villages, which have been slightly changed by the Jews.
I think you also made a really good point right there that I want to stress, is that these children are innocent, okay? A 10-year-old does not have the mental capacity to decide that he or she is going to take his or her own life for the sake of jihad, that what you are seeing is a product of pure indoctrination. I'll never forget when I was filming my documentary film, The Making of a Martyr, and we went to a kindergarten. It was a preschool run by Islamic Jihad. It was called the Islamic Jihad Academy. And they sat the children around in a circle. We came in to film what a typical lesson would be. And they have no qualms with what they're doing. I mean, they're happy to let us in, to let the cameras in and to advertise what they're doing to their children. And the children were sat around in a round circle. And we asked the children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we went around from child to child, and every child said, you know, I want to be a martyr. I want to be a martyr. I want to die for jihad. And one child, about 6-year-old, said, I want to be a teacher. And then in response to that, the teacher said, be quiet. Tell the camera you want to be a martyr too. So these children are innocent, beautiful children who should have the same aspirations as children all over the world, who have the same capabilities, who are capable to grow up, to become doctors, to become lawyers, to become teachers. And the greatest crime and that irony of the teacher, you know, contradicting the child, saying, no, you don't want to become like me. You want to kill yourself for the sake of jihad. And that's really important to remember. And the second thing, I guess this would also go to Arnon, is if you could talk a little bit about the words that are used, because they're very significant words that are being chosen. They talk about killing Jews, Yahud. They don't talk about the Oslo Accords. They don't talk about a two-state solution. They don't, you know, talk about peace agreements or handshakes. They talk specifically about killing Jews, and they do so in a theological context. This is not a political issue. It's not so much a conflict about land, but a theological conflict. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. The books do not include specific terms like kill the Jews or destroy the state of Israel or stage a war against the state of Israel. This is absent, totally absent. What you find in the books is something else. Israel is the source of all evil. Israel, Jews, or they don't use the name Israel, use the name the Zionist occupation kills our children, and steals our land and water and do this and that. I counted over 40 accusations against Israel with not even the slightest objective or not to say a positive description of Israel. So if there is an evil enemy to such an extent, there is no way to peace. And if we talk about the liberation of Palestine, the whole of Palestine, it's very obvious without saying kill the Jews or destroy the state of Israel.
I want to now also relate to some of the questions on the chat. Are we preaching to the converted? What's the purpose of showing this? The purpose of showing this is that you can bring this to your government and ask government officials who deal with the Middle East and say, have you been to an UNRWA refugee school? And if not, why not? And have you been to the classroom? And if not, why not? And when you walk into the school, you can't, someone said, a certain Canadian politician, well, we'll change some of the school books and put papers in for, when you walk in the classroom, when you walk in the schools, you see pictures of martyrs all over the place. Now, we confronted UNRWA, they said they were going to change that. A year ago, by the way, UNRWA said they were going to change the books. Now we have a letter from the UNRWA spokesman. We can't change the books. We have to teach what the Palestinian Authority tells us to teach. But again, the key thing, we use the expression, let my people know. People do not know. This has been obfuscated by just about everyone. What we just heard from Brooke about the extent to which people are pushed aside. I speak very closely to that because we do not have many organizations asking us to speak because of the message we have. Incidentally, as someone who came from the peace movement, it would have been a delight for me, the greatest nachas in the world, had we found a few school books for peace. That's what the Paris Center for Peace is promoting, as if there's peace in these schools. It doesn't exist. Now, I welcome anyone to work with us to spread this to churches, to spread this to synagogues, to help us present this at the Canadian Parliament and when the COVID is over, as we've done before. This is very, very important. It gets out. And your pencil letter to Parliament members, have you been to an UNRWA school? And if not, why not? Because it's there. And they're not, and as Brooke is also strengthening, there's none of them, part of their culture is showing everything. Robert Wistrich sat in this chair, one of the great experts on Nazi Germany. He looked at our material, he said, The difference between the Nazis and these guys is the Nazis tried to cover everything, and these people do reveal everything openly.
If I could interject now, I just have two things that I want to make sure people are aware of. First of all, and it didn't come up, but I think David should address it. We know, and I have the letter here somewhere, that the American government put in place an agreement or required UNRWA to sign an agreement this year about changing their books before they could get the money. And I read all of the resolution that you sent to me. Will UNRWA uphold its new policy you wrote in August? Can you tell us what's happening? If they just signed an agreement and they promised to do these things.
The news as of 2 days ago. All right, first of all, they signed the agreement on July 14th between UNRWA and the US. On July 17th, the US says, okay, we're going to renew the funding. On July 30th, UNRWA says we're not going to change the books. Well, that caused a furor in Congress, both Democrats and Republicans. And the meeting that took place on September 9th, which was last week, of the UNRWA donor nations, the head of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini, said we want to welcome the Americans back as to the family of nations supporting UNRWA. However, they haven't given the money yet. We're in touch with a senator named Senator Risch, Senator James Risch of Idaho, who led the fight in Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to hold back the funds until they see until they see a change. UNRWA made the mistake a year ago. They told New Zealand. I don't think we can speak to New Zealand, right? But they told New Zealand we're changing the books. We have it in writing. Okay, and Lazzarini himself appeared at the UN and said we're going to consider changing the books. Now we have his spokeswoman saying the opposite. This is affecting the American Congress. And what's interesting, as you read my article perhaps in the Jerusalem Report, that Biden's requirements for UNRWA were even better than Trump's. Very, very clear. And the fact that we use the expression in Israel, it's safe, they just ignored them, is now having a ripple effect in the last 2 days, because when we sent our representative to the PA Curriculum Center to get the books that they're giving to UNRWA, said we don't have, the money hasn't come through, therefore they're going to Qatar for the money.
So the Americans watching should really be in touch with their congressman, and we will make sure that they have this video link that they can share with them, correct? So let me just take you to the one Canadian experience that we need to share. With Brooke's help, we sent out a questionnaire to all of the political parties. We're in the midst of a federal election, most of you know, and foreign affairs has not come up at all on anybody's agenda, even though there have been a couple of debates with representatives from at least the three major parties. So in response to our questionnaire, just yesterday, I thought you'd be interested in this, David, we got an answer from Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative leader. In response to our question about whether Canada should have reinstated funding to UNRWA and what will the party do given that UNRWA is what I said, fomenting Jew hatred in its curriculum, the response is Canada's Conservatives will defund programs aligned against Canadian values, including those delivered by UNRWA, unless it is significantly reformed and replaced with new education initiatives that uphold universal human dignity, pluralism, and peaceful coexistence. So I wanted to make sure that our Canadian listeners had a chance to hear that. I've had no response from any of the other parties. Yeah.
I want to make one point to what David said before about those of us who have been speaking truth about this issue being marginalized in the advocacy community and also within the Jewish advocacy community. I wanted to share an experience that I had, because I think we're making a huge mistake by not as a community coming together and advocating for the civil and human rights of Muslim children, because this issue is one that has the potential to unite us, to unite the world. When I first came out with my film, The Making of a Martyr, I would go to different schools that in the United States and screen it, where there was a very strong contingency of Students for Justice in Palestine or what have you, a very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic environment in the school. And before I started the screening, I asked the audience saying, who thinks Muslim children are innocent? And everybody in the audience would raise their hand. And I said, who thinks that Muslim children should not be intentionally murdered? Everybody raised their hand. I said, well, if you think Muslim children are innocent, then do you think that they should have a bomb strapped around them and blown up by remote control as Hamas and Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades were doing? And they said no. I said, well, if that's wrong, well, then do you think Muslim children should be taught in their school textbooks that they should kill themselves as suicide, homicide bombers? And everybody said no. And we all agreed on the basic principle that Muslim children are innocent. And when you work from there, you can find common ground with people you would otherwise disagree with on a political level about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This issue is a unifier issue. I can't stress that enough. And at the end of the screening, members of Students for Justice for Palestine would come up to me and thank me for exposing this issue that they themselves could not publicly agree with. The same thing when I debated Hamid Dabashi from Columbia University. He could not publicly support the use of Muslim children as suicide, homicide bombers. I also had a question, and maybe David or Arnon can answer this. This is something that we in the West can do to absolve ourselves of culpability, which is defund. But as you mentioned before, Qatar is just coming in and refunding. So in the movie, you say the time has come for UNRWA. I think you use the word reformed. The time has come for UNRWA to be dismantled. And why is it that the Israelis continue to allow UNRWA to operate? The Israelis provide, I think, strategic support for UNRWA as well. What do we do if we defund and just Qatar comes in and provides the rest of the budget?
Keep it simple. Condition the funding. You don't get a penny, and this is the issue of what the American government has now proposed. You don't get a penny unless we see a revamping of the school books, a revamping of education. And it's not only school books. All the school plays, we film the school plays on a constant basis. The school plays feature the murder of Jews. There has to be a revamping of the schools as the condition. The problem with the issue of the hatchet, of knocking off UNRWA completely, as you just hinted, Qatar comes in, and we've just produced this film, by the way, in German. The first film we produced in German. We're going to do a whole series, and we made our first presentation to a lobby in Germany that deals with in the Bundestag with anti-Semitism this past Thursday, because Germany came in place of Trump. Trump's problem of knocking out UNRWA completely, instead of asking for a revamping of UNRWA as condition for the funds, you're not going to get rid of UNRWA. In 2005, I spoke about replacing at the UN, replacing UNRWA with UNHCR. You can't, unfortunately, because of the structure. What you can do is make clear, ironclad conditions. You don't meet these conditions, you don't get the funds. And the chances of them meeting conditions, of course, are nil. But you have to go on the offensive there. And the Israel change, there is a change in Israel. We have the cooperation of the UN ambassador, Israel's UN ambassador, Erdan, who presented the presentation that Dr. Groiss just presented. He presented, with Israel's full support. There was a very short-sighted Israeli policy for many years until a year ago, when they wouldn't talk to us, and because it was delaying the peace process. And unfortunately, the peace process is based on the idea that if you give economic incentives, that's all you need to do. Well, those days are over, we hope, because that's one of the problems we face. But now, the conditioning of funds, that's the message to every government.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. We've done very well in keeping people's attention. There's a lot more information, obviously, that you could share, and many more questions. So I'm going to let Brooke wrap it up. You may have a final question or comment, Brooke. I think you've made it very clear people need to take action, and that's really what we're about. And in conjunction with you, our organization will keep pushing forward with End Jew Hatred. And I'd love to let you sum up.
Let's see a constructive formula for policy change in UNRWA. And for those watching this, you may not understand the power of 5 or 6 people giving feedback. These are the 6 points. okay, which are easy to do. They're workable. They fit UN principles. They fit all the principles of Western democracy. Canceling the curriculum, stopping military training at the schools, dismissing employees who are affiliated with Hamas. They have a youth ambassador named Mohammed Asaf, who travels the world encouraging violence. He's officially been put out, but he continues to do so. UNRWA welcomes him. Number 5, the issue of an audit of their funds. How many people understand that UNRWA money does not, because they have so much cash coming in, it goes into terror groups and also into organized crime. And last but not least, introduce UNHCR standards to UNRWA. That's the organization in the United Nations that resettles people. 82% of the people who live in Gaza live in these refugee camps, in 11 refugee camps. They want to get out of there. They want to get out of there. There's a master plan written by a gentleman who's 98 years old now, named Mordechai Ben Porat, 35 years ago. It can still be implemented. You don't have to kick anyone out. You can just resettle them. And one of the tricks done by some greedy people was to convince charitable organizations to start the city of Ruabi in Samaria and say this would be an Arab village, Arab city that would absorb the refugees. Except the first law they made was no refugees allowed. UNHCR, that's a model, but it can't replace UNRWA. It can very easily, their principles can become under UNRWA. You can ask every Canadian and other officials of every government, why aren't you using these principles when dealing with UNRWA?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Arnon, and thank you, Brooke. Any other last comments, Arnon?
I just wanted to say one thing also, and I'll end with this. I actually, the one point that we disagree on, David, is I think UNRWA is beyond redemption, and it has to be dismantled, and it's part of the problem in so many ways, not just the indoctrination issue, but also the very definition of a refugee that they changed, which perpetuates the problem. It's important, Nelson Mandela said something that has always resonated with me, which is his quote was, "There can be no keener revelation into a society's soul than the way in which it treats its own children." There's so much that we can do, but ultimately change must come from within. The Palestinian Muslim community must themselves have a moment of enlightenment, because beyond their schools, it's their religious theologians, their politicians, their textbooks, their television programs. Often you saw in the video, the parents of the children are also the ones pushing for this. This is a systemic problem within the society that has to be solved. And it's not necessarily a problem that we should always describe as one of Jew hatred. This is a human rights issue. The greatest human rights, civil rights issue of our time is saving these children, because our future and the future of our children is intrinsically linked to theirs, to that community and the way they treat their children. And I also want to say it is so important to support the work of David and Arnon. There is nobody else doing this work. That is why the work must be shown, it must be supported, and every single person should hang up and send an email immediately to the representative demanding and accusing them of having Muslim blood on their hands for continuing to fund UNRWA. They are complicit. We are aiding and abetting the murder of Muslim children by continuing to fund, as David said, without conditions.
I think that sums it up very well. I would agree with you, but taking action is really so important. So there's many ways you've heard. Everybody should be in touch with elected officials. We need to get UNRWA and the whole Palestinian education system on the agenda of our respective governments. We need to share this within the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community. I think right at the beginning, David and Brooke made it really clear that we've got to expand the tent. We have got to get more people understanding what is going on. Our own community is divided on it, apolitical on it is the way they would describe it, which is useless. So please follow up with CAEF. support the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research, and you will get a copy of this video, the recording from today, and a link to the actual video that you all saw. So thank you everyone for joining us. Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova.
This is a good way to bring in Yom Kippur when we think about new ways of doing things and reassess what we've been doing. But again, let my people know.
Thank you. Thank you, Arnon. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, David, for helping us with the technology. Everyone, have a good day. Take care.